The walk from the truck to the front porch felt longer than the drive from the river. The gravel crunched loudly under Amy's boots, a harsh, rhythmic accusation in the stillness of the evening. The storm that had threatened all day had finally blown over, leaving behind a sky stripped clean and cold, studded with stars that looked too far away to offer any comfort. The ranch house, usually a beacon of warm yellow light and wood smoke, loomed dark against the horizon. The lights were on, but they didn't look inviting. They looked clinical, sharp, like the lights of an operating theater where something vital was being dissected. Amy reached for the doorknob, her hand trembling. The metal was freezing against her palm. She hesitated, standing on the threshold of the life she had tried so desperately to outgrow. For the past week, she had convinced herself that she was the CEO, the visionary, the woman who would drag this family into the 21st century, whether they wanted to go or not. But standing there, covered in river mud and regret, she felt impossibly small. She was just a granddaughter again, a little sister, a disappointment. She pushed the door open. The air inside was warm, smelling faintly of pot roast and sage, the scent of a family dinner that had likely been eaten in grim silence. Amy stepped into the entryway, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She wanted to shout. She wanted to run into the living room and scream, "I didn't do it." She wanted them to rush to her, to hug her, to tell her they were proud of her for doing the right thing. But the silence that greeted her strangled the words in her throat. She walked into the open concept living and dining area. They were there. Jack sat at the head of the table, his plate pushed away, half-eaten. His hands were wrapped around a mug of tea, but he wasn't drinking. He was staring into the dark liquid as if reading the dregs of his legacy. Lisa sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his forearm, her posture rigid and protective. And Lou stood by the sink, her back to the room, aggressively scrubbing a pot that was likely already clean. When Amy entered, the scrubbing stopped. No one turned around. No one spoke. The floorboards creaked under Amy's weight, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the quiet room. They knew she was there. They had been waiting for the sound of her truck for hours, terrifying scenarios playing out in their minds. Had she signed? Was the deed gone? Was this the last night they would sleep in this house as owners? Jack slowly lifted his head. His eyes met Amy's, and the look in them nearly brought her to her knees. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. Anger was heat, energy, something she could fight against. This was devastation. It was the hollow, gray look of a man who had prepared himself to lose everything he loved. He looked at her not as his granddaughter, but as a stranger who had just walked in with a lit match. He didn't ask if she had signed. He was too afraid of the answer. Amy opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to tell them that Nathan was gone and the deal was dead, but the words turned to ash on her tongue. Why should she explain? They had driven her to this. Their fear, their suffocation, their refusal to see her potential. They were the reason she was standing here broken instead of celebrating at the Obsidian. A flare of defensive resentment rose up, warring with her guilt. They looked at her like a criminal, so she would carry the silence like a sentence. She walked past the table. She felt the magnetic pull of their gaze, the desperate question hanging in the air, but she kept her eyes fixed on the staircase. Lou turned from the sink. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She opened her mouth, a question forming on her lips. Did you? But she closed it again. She saw the set of Amy's jaw, the defensive hunch of her shoulders, and the mud on her boots. Lou assumed the worst. She assumed the mud was from the construction site of the new ranch. She assumed the silence was the arrogance of victory. Amy reached the stairs and began to climb. 1 step, 2 steps. The distance between the ground floor and the loft felt like miles. Behind her, she heard the soft clink of a ceramic mug being set down on a saucer. It was a dismissal, a finality. She reached her room and shut the door, leaning her back against the wood as if to barricade herself against the judgment downstairs. The loft was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the skylight. It was the same room she had grown up in, filled with the same memories, ribbons on the wall, photos of her mother, the quilt on the bed. But it didn't feel like her room anymore. It felt like a museum exhibit of a girl who no longer existed. She slid down the door until she hit the floor, pulling her knees up to her chest. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the confrontation with Nathan had completely evaporated, leaving her body shaking with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She closed her eyes, and instantly, Nathan's face appeared in the darkness behind her lids. Not the angry Nathan, but the sad one. The one who had looked at her with such profound pity in the driveway. You saved their feelings, but you sacrificed your future. I hope it was worth it. The words looped in her mind. A poisonous mantra. Was it worth it? She listened to the silence of the house below. There was no joy down there. There was no gratitude. She had saved them, and they hated her anyway. She had given up the white barns, the heated floors, the international acclaim, the independence. She had thrown it all away to protect an old man's pride and a sister's control issues. And for what? To be treated like a pariah? A sob ripped through her chest, sudden and violent. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle it, refusing to let them hear her cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing she was hurting. She cried for the New World Ranch, mourning it like a living thing that had died. She cried for the version of herself that Nathan had believed in, the strong, decisive CEO. That woman was dead too, drowned in the river of her family's expectations. She crawled over to her bed and curled up on top of the covers, not bothering to take off her coat or her muddy boots. The dirt stained the quilt, but she didn't care. She felt dirty on the inside. She felt like a double agent who had been disavowed by both sides. She had betrayed Nathan by not signing. She had betrayed her family by almost signing. She belonged nowhere. Downstairs, the lights were turned off one by one. The house settled into the night, the wood contracting in the cold. Amy lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom weight of a pen in her hand. She hadn't signed the paper, but she had signed something else tonight. She had signed a resignation letter to her dreams, and as the tears soaked into the pillow, she realized that Nathan was right about one thing: she had let them win. And she hated them for it. The dawn broke over Heartland with a reluctance that matched Lou Fleming's spirit. The sky was a bruised purple, transitioning slowly into a flat, impenetrable gray that promised more unseasonal cold. On the front porch, Lou paced the length of the worn wooden slats, her boots making a soft, repetitive thudding sound that she hoped wouldn't wake the house, though she doubted anyone was truly sleeping. She hadn't slept at all. She had spent the night in a vigil of terror, sitting in the armchair downstairs, listening to the wind and waiting for the world to end. Every creak of the house settling felt like the structure groaning under the weight of a new mortgage. Every car passing on the distant highway sounded like a foreclosure agent coming to pound a sign into the front lawn. She stopped at the railing, gripping the cold wood until her knuckles ached. Her eyes were fixed on the driveway, scanning the horizon for a black SUV, or a bank courier, or a sheriff. She felt nauseous. The uncertainty was a physical weight pressing on her chest, constricting her lungs. Amy had come home last night, silent and broken, but she hadn't said the words. She hadn't said, "I signed it," but she hadn't said, "I didn't either." And Lou hadn't asked. It was a cowardice she didn't know she possessed. Lou Fleming, the woman who tackled problems head-on, the woman who managed crises for a living, was too terrified to ask her own sister a simple yes or no question. Because as long as she didn't ask, there was a chance, however microscopic, that the ranch was still theirs. As long as the words weren't spoken, she could pretend that the deed wasn't sitting in Nathan Price's safe, legally binding them to a man who built prisons for profit. She took a sip of her coffee. It was stone cold and bitter, tasting of dregs. She poured the rest over the railing into the dormant rose bushes. She couldn't stay here. The silence inside the house was suffocating, thick with the unsaid things between her, Jack, and Amy. She needed noise. She needed movement. She needed to be somewhere where she wasn't just the controlling sister, but a person with agency. 10 minutes later, her SUV was tearing down the road toward Hudson. She drove with mechanical precision, her mind racing through legal strategies she knew were useless. If Amy signed, can we prove coercion? Can we prove the asset valuation was fraudulent? Can we petition for a competency hearing? It was all desperate, grasping straws. Nathan had covered his tracks. If Amy had put pen to paper, the trap was sprung. Hudson was waking up as she rolled into town. The familiar sight of Maggie's diner usually brought her comfort, a reminder of her mother, of the community they had built. But today, even the town felt fragile. She looked at the storefronts, the tack shop, the bakery, the small law office, and she didn't see a community. She saw real estate. She saw zoning maps. She saw a playground for men like Nathan Price, who looked at these historic streets and saw only underutilized assets. She parked the car and walked toward the diner, needing the normalcy of a fresh coffee and noise. But before she could reach the door, a collision of papers and hurried limbs stopped her. Damn it. Sorry, Lou. Lou stepped back, instinctively reaching out to steady the man who had nearly barreled into her. It was Rick Adderley. Her former campaign manager, her chaotic but brilliant friend, is currently the chief administrative officer for the town of Hudson. Usually, Rick was the picture of manicured perfection, suits pressed, hair gelled within an inch of its life. Today, he looked like he had been dragged through a hedge backward. His tie was askew. He had a coffee stain on his shirt cuff, and he was clutching a sheaf of documents as if they were the last life raft on the Titanic.
Rick, you look terrible.
Thank you, Lou. Always the flatterer. I feel terrible. I feel like I've been wrestling with a pig in a mud pit, except the pig is the town council and the mud is red tape. He bent down to pick up a dropped file, groaning as he did so. Lou knelt to help him. As she gathered the papers, her eyes caught the headers. Zoning variance request. Sector 4. Environmental impact waiver. Expedited approval motion.
What is all this? Since when does the council expedite environmental waivers?
Rick snatched the papers back, stuffing them into his leather satchel with frantic energy. He looked around the street, his eyes darting nervously as if checking for spies. Since about 3 months ago. It's a nightmare, Lou. We have these consultants coming in, slick guys from Calgary and Toronto, and suddenly the mayor is bypassing the standard review periods. They're pushing through developments that violate the town charter. And every time I raise a flag, I get told to streamline the process. Lou straightened up, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the wind. Slick guys from Calgary. Bypassing reviews. It sounded familiar. It sounded like the same playbook Nathan was using on Amy: speed, pressure, efficiency over due diligence.
Who are the developers?
Shell companies, LLCs buried inside other LLCs. Obsidian Development, Prairie Horizon Corp, Future Forward Land Holdings. It's all faceless money, Lou, and it's flooding in. They aren't just buying land. They're buying the rules. Lou felt a click in her brain, a gear that hadn't turned in years. She had spent the last week playing detective, trying to find dirt on one man. But Rick was describing a system. Nathan wasn't just targeting Heartland because it was a pretty ranch. He was targeting the region. He needed Heartland as a base of operations, a foothold to leverage the rest of the valley.
They're buying the rules.
Exactly. And I'm just the admin guy. I can't stop them. The mayor is rubber stamping everything they put in front of him. I think he's scared of them. Or bought by them. Or both. Rick ran a hand through his hair, messing it up further. He looked at Lou, really looked at her. and his expression shifted from frantic to speculative. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen when she ran for mayor years ago. He saw the frustration of a woman who was tired of being pushed around by men with checkbooks. You know, we have an election cycle starting in 2 months. Luz laughed, a harsh, dry sound. She shook her head, turning toward the diner door.
Don't even start, Rick. My life is a burning building right now. I can't run a campaign. I can barely run my own kitchen.
That's exactly why you should run. Because you're angry. And right now, Hudson doesn't need a politician. It needs a bulldog. It needs someone who knows how to read a balance sheet and isn't afraid to tell a developer to go to hell. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the diner. His voice dropped, losing its frantic edge and becoming serious. The mayor has access to the sealed archives. Lou. He has subpoena power for municipal investigations. He directs the local RCMP detachments on priority cases. The words hung in the air between them. Sealed archives. Subpoena power. Police priorities. Lou froze. Her mind raced back to the conversation with Steve, her forensic accountant. I can't get past the firewall, Lou. We need a warrant or a court order. As a private citizen, she was helpless. She was just a prying sister. But as mayor, as the highest official in the district, she wouldn't just be looking for dirt. She would be the one holding the shovel.
Rick, are you saying what I think you're saying?
I'm saying that if you want to know who is really buying up this town, the mayor's office has the keys to the filing cabinet. Lou looked past him, down the street of the town she had grown up in. She saw the for sale signs in the windows. She felt the shadow of Nathan Price stretching over everything, invisible and suffocating. She had been trying to fight him with emotion, with pleas to Amy's heart. That had failed. Maybe it was time to fight him with power.
Buy me a coffee, Rick. We need to talk.
The bell above the door of Maggie's diner jingled with a cheerful, nostalgic sound that felt entirely out of place in Lou Fleming's current reality. She stepped inside, the familiar scent of frying bacon, old coffee, and lemon floor cleaner washing over her. She slid into a booth near the back, away from the prying eyes of the breakfast regulars who were already whispering about the shouting match heard at Heartland 2 nights ago. In a town like Hudson, secrets traveled faster than the wind, and Lou could feel the weight of their speculation pressing against her skin. Rick slid into the seat opposite her, dumping his satchel on the table. He looked less like a government official, and more like a conspiracy theorist on the brink of a breakthrough. He waved down a waitress, ordered 2 black coffees with a frantic urgency, and then leaned across the Formica table, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You didn't hear this from me. If anyone asks, we're discussing the erratic schedule of the garbage trucks.
Rick, I don't have the bandwidth for cloak and dagger. Just tell me what's going on.
Rick pulled a single folded sheet of paper from his pocket and slid it under the sugar dispenser. It was a preliminary agenda for the next town council meeting. Several items were highlighted in angry yellow highlighter. Look at item 4. Rezoning of agricultural sector 7 for mixed-use commercial. And item 9. Review of water rights allocation for non-residential entities. Lou stared at the paper. Sector 7. That was the valley floor. That was prime grazing land. That was Heartland's neighbor.
They can't rezone Sector 7. It's protected heritage land.
Not if the mayor declares it a zone of economic stagnation and grants an emergency variance, which he is planning to do next Tuesday. Lou felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It wasn't just Nathan. It was a coordinated attack. Nathan was the spearhead, coming for the specific property, but the council was the shield, rewriting the laws to make sure no one could stop him. If the zoning changed, the value of the land would skyrocket, making the taxes unaffordable for ranchers like Jack. They wouldn't have to be bought out. They would be taxed out.
Why is the mayor doing this? He ran on a platform of protecting the green belt.
He also ran on a platform of not being broke. Rumors his construction company was going under until a mysterious angel investor bailed him out last month. Now, suddenly, he's very interested in modernizing the valley. Rick took a sip of the coffee that had just arrived, grimacing at the heat. He looked at Lou, studying her face, measuring the exhaustion against the resolve. This brings me to my random, totally hypothetical question. Have you reconsidered your stance on public office? Lou laughed, but it was a hollow, brittle sound. She rubbed her temples, trying to massage away the headache that had been her constant companion for 3 days.
Rick, look at me. My sister won't talk to me. My grandfather looks like he's aged 10 years in a week. I am currently holding my family together with duct tape and prayers. I don't have the time to run a campaign.
You don't have the time not to. Rick leaned forward, his expression stripping away the chaotic persona to reveal the sharp political strategist underneath. Think about it, Lou. As a private citizen, what are you? You're a concerned neighbor. You're a nuisance. You can file complaints, and the mayor can shred them. You can ask for records, and they can hide behind proprietary information clauses. He tapped a finger on the table, emphasizing every word. But as mayor, you aren't asking. You're ordering. The mayor is the chief executive officer of the municipality. You have ex officio status on all planning committees. You have the right to inspect the financial disclosures of all development applications. Lou stopped rubbing her temples. She stared at Rick. The fog of helplessness that had clouded her mind since the night of the fight began to lift, pierced by a sharp, cold beam of strategy.
I could see the applications?
You could see the raw data, the funding sources, the impact studies, and you have the power to issue subpoenas for municipal inquiries if you suspect corruption. Subpoenas. The word echoed in Lou's mind like a weapon being cocked. She thought of Steve, her forensic accountant, hitting the firewall of Nathan's shell companies. I need a court order, Lou. She had thought that was impossible. But Rick was handing her the key. If she was the mayor, she wouldn't need to beg for the truth. She could demand it. She looked down at the agenda on the table. It wasn't just a list of boring meetings anymore. It was a battlefield map, and currently the enemy was occupying the high ground while she was stuck in the trenches. Lou, the current mayor, is selling the town to invisible developers. You're Lou Fleming. You're Heartland. You're the local girl fighting for the land. The narrative writes itself. Protect our home. It's not just a slogan, it's the truth. Lou looked out the window of the diner. The street was quiet, dust motes dancing in the pale sunlight. She saw the sheriff's cruiser drive past slowly. She saw the town she loved being carved up like a carcass. She thought of Amy, crying in her room, manipulated by a man who had more money and power than they could comprehend. Lou couldn't outspend Nathan. She couldn't outcharm him. But maybe, just maybe, she could outrank him. It was a terrifying thought. A campaign would be grueling. It would take her away from the ranch when they needed her most. But if she didn't do it, they were sitting ducks. This wasn't a distraction from the fight. This was the only way to level the playing field.
It would be a bloodbath.
Oh, absolutely. They'll come for you. They'll dig up every mistake you've ever made. But the question is, are you willing to bleed to stop them? Lou thought of the New World Ranch. She thought of the toxic asset classification. She thought of the look on Nathan's face, that smug, untouchable calm. She picked up the coffee cup, the ceramic warm against her cold fingers. Her eyes hardened, the grief replaced by a cold, calculating determination.
I'm not just willing to bleed, Rick. I'm willing to go to war.
Rick grinned, pulling a pen from his pocket. That's what I wanted to hear. Let's draft an announcement speech. Lou nodded, her mind already racing 3 steps ahead. It was dirty, it was exhausting, and it was dangerous. But right now, it was the only sword sharp enough to cut the head off the snake. She would run. She would win. And then she would open the archives and drag Nathan Price's secrets into the light, one subpoena at a time. The adrenaline of the decision coursed through Lou's veins as she stepped out of Maggie's diner, a stark contrast to the heavy dread she had carried in. The world looked different now. The sleepy streets of Hudson weren't just a backdrop for her despair. They were a constituency. The cracked pavement, the fading storefronts, they were things she could fix, things she could protect. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like a victim waiting for the axe to fall. She felt like a predator who had just found a new set of teeth. She walked toward her car, her heels clicking purposefully on the sidewalk. Her mind was already drafting her campaign slogan, organizing town halls, listing the donors she could call. She was so lost in the strategy that she didn't notice the cruiser until the siren chirped once, a short, sharp burst of sound that made her jump. It was the sheriff's cruiser, parked at an angle that blocked her exit. The window rolled down slowly. Sheriff Clay Miller sat behind the wheel. Lou had known Clay since high school. He had been the linebacker on the football team when she was on the debate squad. They had always had a friendly, easy rapport, the kind born of small-town shared history. But as he looked at her now, over the rim of his aviator sunglasses, there was no smile. His face was set in grim lines, the tanned skin around his mouth tight.
Clay, you nearly gave me a heart attack. Am I illegally parked?
She tried to keep her voice light, forcing a smile. But the air around the car felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. He didn't make a joke about her driving. He turned off the ignition and stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt. He walked over to her, positioning himself so that his body blocked her from the view of the street. It was a subtle move, intimate and threatening all at once. "We need to talk, Lou. Off the record."
Okay, is everything all right?
He took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that looked tired and worried. He glanced up and down the street, checking for listeners, before leaning in closer. The smell of stale coffee and gun oil clung to his uniform. "I got a call this morning, from the provincial detachment. They were asking questions about a private inquiry being run on a local businessman, an inquiry linked to your name." Lou's heart skipped a beat. Her forensic accountant, Steve, must have tripped a wire.
I'm just doing some due diligence, Clay. Since when is that a police matter?
Since the name you're digging into is Nathan Price. The name hung in the air between them, heavier than lead. Clay lowered his voice to a harsh whisper, his hand resting on the hood of her car, fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. "Look, I know you. I know you're fierce when it comes to your family. But you are kicking a hornet's nest that is bigger than you realize. I've been in law enforcement for 20 years, Lou. I know when to push, and I know when to walk away."
Are you telling me to walk away?
I'm telling you that this guy, he isn't just a developer. He has friends. High places. The kind of places that can make life very difficult for a rancher in Hudson. The call I got wasn't a friendly heads up. It was a warning. They told me to tell you to cease and desist your harassment before they file charges for corporate espionage. Lou felt a flash of cold anger. Harassment? She was trying to stop a fraud, but she saw the fear in Clay's eyes. He wasn't threatening her. He was scared for her, and that terrified her more than any direct threat could have. If the local sheriff was being leaned on by provincial authorities to shut her down, then the corruption had already spread to the badge.
He's a fraud, Clay. He's lying to my sister. He's trying to steal our land.
I don't know about that. If you keep digging, you're going to find yourself in a hole you can't climb out of. And I might not be able to help you. He put his sunglasses back on, masking his eyes, becoming the uniform again. Go home, Lou. Hug your kids. Forget about Nathan Price. For your own good. He walked back to his cruiser, the heavy boots scuffing the pavement. He climbed in and drove away without looking back, leaving Lou standing alone in the shadow of the diner. She watched the taillights fade. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. From clarity. Clay thought he was saving her. He thought he was giving her an exit ramp. But all he had done was confirm exactly what Rick had said. The system was rigged. The police were compromised. The mayor was bought. As a private citizen, she was a target. If she continued to investigate Nathan from the outside, they would crush her with legal threats and police intimidation. But if she was mayor, if she was the boss, Clay would answer to her. The threat hadn't deterred her. It had radicalized her. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She dialed Rick's number before she even got back into her car.
Rick, it's me. Print the posters. I'm running.
She got into her car and slammed the door. The fear was gone, burned away by the heat of the fight. They wanted her to stop. They wanted her to be a good little victim. They had picked the wrong Fleming. Lou put the car in gear and drove toward Heartland, driving not like a woman retreating, but like a soldier returning to base to gather her army. The war for Hudson had just begun.